Hello there my lovely jewelry makers, I'm Christina of CSLdesigns, and in today's tutorial I'm going to show you how to make this cute wirework bow bracelet. Now this does actually match perfectly with previous designs that I made, so if you want to make a set I'm going to leave a link to those tutorials in the description box down below. And also if you'd like any of these bracelets for yourself, they are available for sale in my shop along with other jewelry kits and tutorials, so you can always support me that way. And if you want to support me in another way so I can keep making these tutorials for you, you can like, share and subscribe, and there's also a super thanks button below the video. But if you'd like to learn how you can make this bow bracelet for yourself or maybe as a present for someone else, then keep watching. So these are the materials that we'll need. Now the wire I'm using is a regular round rose gold coated copper wire, and the first gauge here is a 1mm. This will be our base wire, and then for the weaving wire we'll be using a 0.4mm. We then of course also just need a few tools, so I've got my flush cutters to cut the wire with, tweezers and nose pliers to help manipulate the wire. I'm using these 6-step bell making pliers for any loops we need to make, but you can of course use round nose pliers as well. Now I'm just also going to be using a ruler to help make the piece as symmetrical as possible, and then a mandrel to help shape the bow. Now I'm just using a crochet hook because they come in many different sizes, but you can use whatever you have handy. So like usual, make sure to check out the description box below the video for the material list and useful links. Otherwise, let's get it all ready and let's get started. Then we need some lengths of our wire, so I have two lengths here of the 1mm of about 60 centimeters each, and make sure they're nice and straight so we don't have any kinks in them. As for the 0.4mm, I'm just going to leave that attached to the reel, that way we have minimum waist stitch. Now to get started, I'm going to grab my two base wires here and my length of weaving wire, and we want to find the midpoint of the base wire, so you can just measure that, and then just leave a short little tail to hold on to, and I'm going to then put the weaving wire behind the base wires, and we need to start our weave. So I'm just going to wrap around the bottom one by itself, and I'm just going to repeat that. So I wrapped around the bottom one by itself twice, and make sure your wraps are nice and tight. Then I'm going to bring the wire up behind the other base wire, and then come over the top of that one, down between the two, to wrap around that top one by itself, and repeat that. So again we have two wraps right next to each other around the top one. You just help squeeze anything tight there. Now you can just do that a couple of times. So I'm going back to wrapping around the bottom one by itself, and again I'm doing it twice every time. So we're doing the figure of 8 weave, and just back to the top and wrap around that twice, and then I'm just squeezing everything together to make sure it's nice and tight. Now from here we straight away need to get into making the actual bow part. So making sure that I keep that weaved section that we just done in the middle of our base wires, I'm then going to start pushing apart the two base wires after that weaved section, so they're just kind of coming more out towards the sides there at an angle. Now how much you want to do is up to you. You can make it really wide or you can make it narrower. That all depends how you want your bow to look. But then what we need to do is continue the figure of 8 weave, and that is then going to end up basically filling in the gap that's between the two base wires, graduating outwards. So we're just going to continue wrapping around the bottom one by itself, and do that twice, and then coming up behind the top one to wrap around that one by itself, and again do that twice. Always making sure that the wraps are always nice and tight, and you just keep alternating like this, going down to the bottom one, doing your 2 wraps, going up to the top one and doing your 2 wraps around that. And then you're going to be able to see that we're gradually going to fill in that space between the two base wires with a nice little weave section here, and you just want to continue until you reach the point where that's basically going to be the size of your bow. So this is what we have so far. Now how long you make this weave is also going to determine how large your bow is going to be. So what you could do is always use a ruler or something to kind of measure it, so you make sure both sides get pretty even. What I usually tend to do is make them about 2 to 2.5 centimeters long until we get to the midpoint here. So what I'm going to do is just start to basically bring the wires back together. So first of all I'm just going to kind of get them straight out so they just continue at about the same distance from each other, and then I just want to continue the weave just a little bit, and then just make sure it stays nice and tight by keep pushing it down against your previous wraps. So do your double wrap around the bottom wire, go up to the top and do your double wrap around that. Now once I've then just weaved the midsection here, what we need to do is start bringing the base wires back in towards each other. So basically graduate inwards, opposite to what we were doing before. So we just want to bring them closer together to the point where they meet up, and you just want that to be roughly the same as the first section that we did. And you can just gently move your wires a bit out of the way here, straighten them out at the end so we can get in between them with our weaving wire. But then we need to weave this last section as well. Now what you're going to find is, because we're now moving from a wider point to a narrower point, the wire is going to want to slip like that towards the narrower point. So to help prevent that from happening, every time now we wrap, we need to make sure we're pushing the previous wrap nice and tight against all the other wraps that we've done, while we're then making our new wrap on the opposite side. And of course also pushing that down nice and tight. So do your double wraps there, and then I'm just going to swap and push down the wraps that I just made, while I'm then bringing the weaving wire to the opposite side to do the wraps on that side. And that is how you then make sure to get your wrap staying nice and tight and avoid the wires slipping down towards the narrower point. So just keep doing that until we reach the point where the wires meet up and we have our full section for the 1/2 of the bow. So now we have this section in place, what we can do is cut off the weaving wire from the reel. Now what I'm going to do is leave a tail of about 70 centimeters or so. You can also easily cut it shorter if you don't want to worry about having tails to use later on. When I would go to use this tail, you would just start with a new length of wire. So it's completely up to you and what you feel comfortable with. But then what we're going to do is leave this here. I'm going to flip my piece around, and then we can just kind of get all these wires a bit out of the way, because what we then need to do is basically repeat the exact same thing on the other side here. So that means we need to grab our weaving wire again, and I'm still now leaving it attached to the reel. But what I'm just going to do is leave a tail of about 30 centimeters or so, and then start from that point. So just put that behind and then leave the tail here out of the way. Now, like I just mentioned before, if you don't feel comfortable leaving tails that might get tangled up as you're working, you can easily just leave a short tail like we did in the beginning. And then when I go to use this tail later on, you can just add a new wire. But otherwise, we're going to do the same. First of all, we need to attach this. So just wrap it around the bottom wire by itself twice, first of all, like that, and make sure to push it down, and then just go to the top and wrap twice around that top base wire. That way we've attached our weaving wire now again, and just make sure they're nice and tight and push them all the way down. Now what we then need to start doing is widening our two base wires just like we did on the other side. So just push them apart so they come out at an angle, and try and get it as similar to the other side as possible. So you can obviously do that by eye, and you can equally use a measuring tape to kind of, like I mentioned before, measure the length, but you could also use it to measure the width. So you make sure you get them as even as possible. But otherwise, you just continue. So you want to fill in this space basically in the exact same way as I showed you on the other side, and you just want to do that until you have the equivalent on this side as we do on the first one that I showed you. So now I've finished both sides here, and what we can do is cut off the excess of the weaving wire from the reel, and I've left about the same length as the long length on the other end that we left, so you can just use that to measure with. And then what we're going to do is start to shape these. So first of all, I'm just going to push down in the middle there while just pushing the sides up a little bit so they come up at a bit of an angle like that. And then I'm going to grab my crochet hook, and you can just use whatever form of mandrel that you have. I'm going to place that on just one at a time behind about the midpoint of this section. And then I'm going to push the end around towards the back and just bring it all the way around. So the end of the weave there comes around and meets up with the middle of the piece, and just get that nicely into shape. So you can see this is going to be 1/2 of our bow, and we have kind of that 3D effect in place as well. Then while we're there, you can just flip it around, and straight away I like to just separate out the two legs, you could say, so the base wires in opposite directions. So one goes towards one side and one straight in the other direction there towards the other side. And then I'm going to flip it and basically do the same thing with the other side there, and just get all the weaving wires out of the way. Then place my crochet hook behind about the midpoint, and then push the end of the weave around towards the back, and again the end of the weave comes to the midpoint, and basically the two ends of the weave meet up at the back there. But then if you're happy with how it looks at the front, we can also just flip it to the back and do the same thing with these legs as we did with the other ones. So we just want to separate them out and have one come straight out in one direction, which we then have two of now, and they're just going to sit right next to each other. And then the remaining one we're just going to bring out in the opposite direction. And then we also have two going straight out right next to each other in the opposite direction to the other ones. So then here on the back, if you've left all the tails like me, what we're going to have is just the one short tail that we have that we started out with initially. And I just want to finish that off to get it out of the way. So I'm just going to make sure it continues in the direction that I was wrapped last. And then towards the inside here, I'm going to cut off the excess. And then just make sure I push down the very end so it gets hidden in between all the other wires and tucked out of the way. So that is now out of the way. So what we're going to do now is focus on the part that's going to go across the center here, which is basically the part that's holding the bow together. And we're going to use two of the base wires for that. So I'm just going to be using these two here going out to the one side. And this is also where we need to use the short tail that we left. Again, if you didn't leave a tail, don't worry about it. Just start out with a new length of wire. So I'm just going to flip it so it's comfortable with how I'm going to work with it. And then bring the wire into position. And then what I'm going to do is use the exact same weave. So this is again the figure-of-8 weave. And I'm just going to though make sure that the wires are going to stay pretty close next to each other like this. And just come out in a straight line. So don't worry about any graduating outwards or inwards. We just want to make sure we push the wraps all the way down. And you can always use pliers to help with that. Come to the other side and continue the weave. Push it down nice and tight. And then we just want a length of this that's going to be able to go all the way around the front and come back towards the back here. So then I have about 1.5 centimeters here of weave, and you can always add to it if it's not quite long enough, or take it away if it's too long. But then what we need to do is hold onto our bow here and then start to push this around towards the front. Make sure your weave is pushed all the way tight. And then keep pushing it all the way till we come down where we have the other two base wires. So we can just separate them out a bit more, because what we need is for this length here to come down in between them, to come back towards basically where it was coming from. We can flip it around again and then bring it all the way tight so it just nestles in to that little gap that we have there right on the back. Then we can just check how it looks, see we're happy with how it looks on the front here. Then what we just need to do is get rid of this weaving wire that we'll be using to weave that section with. So I'm just going to bring it around as if I'm doing another wrap, but then just cut off the excess, get rid of that, and then just make sure to push the end down so it nestles in between and gets tucked out of the way. And then what we want to do is separate these two base wires out as well. So what they're going to end up being is becoming part of the bracelet that's going to go around your wrist. So the one that's furthest to one side, separate out to that side to come straight out to the side of the bow, and the other one do the same thing but in the other direction. So something just like that. So now we have that in place here. We can see where we're at with the bow. So the bow itself is kind of finished, but what's missing are the two kind of ends of the ribbon. If you were making the bow with a ribbon, that's going to be down below here, and we're going to use the two remaining base wires for that, and also the weaving wires that we left. So that's what we're going to work on next. Now I'm just going to do one at a time, so just bring your wires out of the way however you need to, so you can work with it comfortably and not get tangled up. So we have the two base wires coming downwards here from the middle of the bow. Now what we need is to shape these in place. So I'm going to grab my Tweezernose pliers for that. And again, it's up to you how you want yours to look. So what we want to do is place our pliers on one of the base wires first of all. And this is going to then determine the length of the piece that's going to be left. So obviously you can make it however long or short you want to, but then place your pliers, and then this length of wire here, we need to then push that against the pliers, going out towards the side that it's coming from, and create about a 90-degree bend like that. You can either finish one first and then make the other one in about the same shape, or you can do them kind of simultaneously. That's completely up to you and how you prefer to work. But I'm just going to place my pliers on the other one and then bend that straight away as well. Kind of find you're a little bit more likely to get them even if you're doing them kind of at the same time. And then we need to decide how wide we want these pieces to be. So we need to move out the wire a little bit from that previous bend. And again, you can make it wider or narrow, that's completely up to you. and then otherwise push the wire against the pliers, and I'm just making sure the wire comes up behind the bow and then straight back up all the way in towards the middle there. And of course I want the same on the other side. Now you can measure by eye, or I kind of like to use my pliers, so I just measure the width there and then bring my pliers to the other wire, and then I can see where I need to place my pliers to get the bend in about the same place. And then same principle, bend the wire against the pliers and making sure I'm going underneath everything to come behind the bow, and again bringing it all the way in towards the middle there. So basically those two base wires are now kind of crossing behind the bow there. And then once we're happy with how they look, what we need to do is also fill in this blank space, so obviously it blends in with the rest, and that's what we're going to use the other two tails that we left. Again, like I said, if you haven't left the tails, you can just start a new length of wire, but you'll have to cut it off from the reel, because what we need to do is weave in and out of this gap. So I'm just going to do one at a time, and I'm just going to take the length of wire, obviously that's closest to this one, and again same principle, I'm using the exact same weave. So I'm going to come down behind, and in this case, just because of how I'm holding it, this piece here is going to be the bottom wire, and then the opposite side is going to be the top wire. And I'm just going to then get straight on with the figure of 8 weave, and now I'm weaving through the shape to get my wraps. So that was once around the bottom one, bring it all the way through, and that's twice around the bottom one, and just make sure to push it up where basically this shape starts, and then I'm going to bring it up underneath the other length and come around that one, wrap around that twice by going down through the shape, and again push that as far up as it'll go, and then we just keep going like this to fill in this shape, basically in the exact same way as we filled in the space between the wires previously, until we get all the way out to the end here. So now that we've filled in the shape here, what I'm just going to do is wherever we've ended up, I'm going to take my weaving wire and just keep coiling around the base wire, basically to fill in the very end and make it blend in with the rest. So I'm just working my way from the one side, doing one wrap at a time, all the way over to the other side. And once I've then run out of space to do any more wraps, what I'm going to do is go ahead and cut off the excess and just have a tiny little tail left that we can then use our pliers to flatten down and kind of just roll it in the direction the wraps are going, so the end gets tucked away inside of the shape. And then that's this one shape filled in. So now you want to just go to the other one, take the other length of weaving wire, or start using a new one, and basically just do the same thing. So fill in the shape with the figure of 8 weave in the exact same way, and also finish off the wire. So now both shapes are filled in here and the bow itself is done. What we have left to do now is the actual bracelet. So what I'm going to do is just flip it to the back, because we have the two lengths of base wire there that are crossing from those bottom sections that we just made. Now what I'm going to do is take my pliers, and we want these to also go straight out to the side. So we just want to take your pliers and place them basically right after where your weave ends, and then just bend them straight out to the side, and then just making sure that this is going to lay right next to the wire that's already there, and they're going to just follow each other all the way out. And the same with the other one. Place your pliers and bend the wire outward so they also come straight out to the side like this. So these wires are going to be part of the bracelet, but we need to add some more. And then we need another 2 lengths of our 1mm of about 40 centimeters each. So that's why I'm going to grab my 2 shorter lengths of 1mm, and we need to combine these with the wires going out to the side, and of course do some weaving as well. So I'm also going to have my weaving wire ready, and I'm just leaving that attached to the reel again, and then I'm just going to start grabbing one of the lengths of 1mm, and we're going to place this on the back and basically follow the rest of them. So this one I'm just placing on the bottom, and I'm just going to flip it around and then do my weave on the front here, because that's the part of the weave that I want to show outward. And I'm going to just leave a short tail, wrap the wire around the bottom base wire, which right now is that new loose one, but I'm just attaching it a couple of times, and then I'm going to get into the weave, and that is going to be over the top of the 2 bottom base wires just once, And also I'm just working a bit further out here instead of working in, where it's really kind of hard to see what you're doing. So just start further out and we can push it down. But then I'm going to come up between those 2 base wires I just wrapped over the top of, go over the top of the next 2 base wires, come up between those, and then we just need to bring in the final base wire, and this one is going to lay as the top one. So just hold everything in place, and from there bring the weaving wire over the top of the top 2 base wires. So we've now moved from the bottom all the way up to the top, and now we need to move our way back down. So I'm going to step down by going up between the bottom 2 base wires, push that down, and then come down between the top 2. So I'm wrapping over the top of the middle 2 basically, and then push that nice and tight, and then I'm just going to wrap over the top of the bottom 2 base wires and just making sure every wrap is tight. And then we're just going to work our way back up. So I'll come up between the 2 I just wrapped over the top of, wrap over the top of the middle 2, come up between those 2 to wrap over the top of the top 2 and work our way back down. So come up between the bottom 2 so I can wrap over the top of the middle 2, and then come all the way down and wrap over the top of the bottom 2. And this is basically what we're going to keep repeating. Make sure you push everything nice and tight. And then once you've done a little bit of a length of the weave here, you can just push this down your base wires and fit it in as far as you can get it in behind the bow there. And you can see there's going to be a natural stopping point, but otherwise you just want to continue weaving the length you want on this side. And of course that's going to be 1/2 of the bracelet, and obviously minus the clasp. And of course once you've done that, you can get rid of the wire, flip it around, and then just repeat the exact same thing with a new length of wire on the other side. Now once I've got the length that I need here, and I've just done my final wrap in the middle, what I'm just going to do is do a few wraps around a single base wire by itself. So I'm just choosing one of them, and I'm wrapping around just so we can finish off the weaving wire safely by having a few wraps around a single base wire. So just something like that. Then I'm just going to go to the back, and we can then cut off the excess, and I'm just cutting it off so there's a tiny little end left that we can then make sure to squeeze down with our tweezers there, just so we can't feel it with our fingers. So we've now also gotten rid of our weaving wire. What there's left to do is finish off the ends here with the base wires, and of course we then also need to make or attach a clasp. Then to finish off the end here, we're going to make a wrapped loop, and what I'm going to do is take the 2 middle wires and I'm going to cross one over the other and just bring them out to the side here. And then I'm going to take the other 2 lengths and cross them over each other as well, just in the same direction. And then making sure that crossover point is above the other one. So we're kind of creating a nice graduated effect here on the end and end up with something like this. Then I'm going to take my tweezers pliers and I'm going to just take the back wire, grab onto that right after where the crossover point is, and then bend it straight up so it comes straight out from the end like that. And then take the other length that's crossing over it, and that we then need to wrap around so we secure it in place. So just wrap it a couple of times, and then on the back we just need to cut off the excess and just make sure to push down the very end. So what we have left are these 2 lengths crossing over at the front. So what I'm just going to do is take one at a time and bring them around the side there and basically just towards the back. So they are just coming around the wire that's on the side, and the other one, same thing but on the other side. So it just crosses over and then comes all the way around the side there. And then on the back, again we need to cut off the excess, and I just want to make sure to leave a short little tail of them of a couple of millimeters, like that. And the same with the other one, cut that off. So we can just take our pliers and push those in and kind of tuck them into the middle there. So the ends are getting tucked out of the way so you can't feel them with your fingers, because obviously we don't want that to catch or scratch on skin while we're wearing it. So that's those wires gotten rid of. What we have left is the one we brought straight out from the end, and that I'm just going to make a wrap loop with that we can then attach our findings to. So I'm going to place my pliers just slightly above where the previous wrap is and bend the wire about a 90-degree angle, and I'm doing it to the side. Then I'm taking my 6-step bell making pliers, or round nose pliers if that's what you're using, place them on the bend, and then just bring the wire all the way around to create a full circle like that. And then I'm just going to grab onto the circle with my pliers so that stays in place while I then wrap the remaining length here underneath the circle, just filling in that little gap that we left. So that is the wrapped part of the loop, and it secures it in place. So then flip it to the back where we don't have any more space now to wrap, cut off the excess, and then again just make sure to push down the end. And then of course you just want to go to the other end and repeat the exact same thing. Now I'm just going to make my own clasp, and I'm just using a length of about 15 centimeters of the 1mm. And what we're going to do is first of all make the hook part, because we already have a loop on the end of the bracelet, so we can just make the part that's going to hook into that. So I'm going to place my pliers a little bit beyond the middle there, and then I'm going to push the wire all the way over the top of the pliers and back down next to itself. We have this little bend in it. What I'm going to then do is tighten that up just like we would tighten a prong. So get it right at the back of your pliers and just close up that gap until we have something like that. And then you just want to decide how long you want your hook to be. Now bear in mind it's going to get folded over, so it'll be half the length of this. I'm just going to place my pliers, hold on to where I want my bend to be. I'm then taking the end that I just bent back and bringing it up against the pliers here, and then we want to bring it over the top of the wire towards the opposite side, and then just wrap it around to fasten it all in place a couple of times here, so we have something like that. I can then go in and cut off the excess and get rid of it, and don't forget to always tighten down the very end of the wire. Now on the other end here we of course need something that we can attach this clasp to the bracelet with. So there I'm just going to make a wrap loop just like we did on the end of the bracelet, and in this case I want to just push the wire towards the back so the two loops can hook into each other nicely. And again make sure to leave that short space, and then we just need to place our pliers to create the loop, bring the wire all the way back around there to create the circle. So we have that here. Now before I close this up I need to attach it to the bracelet. Of course, you can always just use jump rings if you prefer that, but I'm just going to attach this directly to the bracelet, so I want it to sit like this. So I'm going to follow it all the way to then come through from the back here. So it's going to end up sitting in the right direction, and then we can go in and seal the loop in place. So just put your pliers onto the loop that we made and then fasten it by bringing the end of the wire around the space that we left until we don't have any more space left, and we meet up with the other wrap. And then of course we need to just cut off the excess and push down the end, and then all that's left to do is shape the hook itself. So I'm going to get my 6-step bar making pliers again, and I want to place them just a bit below the midpoint of this length that we have, and then push the top part downwards and around the pliers. So we first of all create that first part of the hook shape, and what I then just like to do is grab it onto the very end and just flick that upwards a bit, just like that. And that way it will hook nicely into the loop once we of course shape the bracelet, which is the final thing left to do before we can wear it. And of course you can either shape it around something that has the size and shape you want it to have, like a bracelet mandrel, or you can use your hands and fingers, just go in and start putting a curve into it. Of course making sure the bow is facing outward, and then just gradually add more and more of a curve. Go back and forth until we get it into the shape we want it to have, and of course we also get the two ends closer together so we can use the clasp. So we have something like that, and your bracelet is finished and ready to wear. So that is how you make this cute wirework bow bracelet, and like I mentioned, it matches perfectly to previous pieces that I made, so you can make a whole set if you want to. Otherwise, I really hope you enjoyed this tutorial. Thank you so much for watching it, and I'll see you in the next one.